Hello and welcome to The Farming Week, the news podcast brought to you by Agriland in association with AXA Insurance. I'm Stella Meehan and I'm joined by my colleague Aisling O'Brien to run through the top stories in agriculture over the past week. Firstly, Aisling, the biggest news story in the country over the past 7 days had to have been election 2024 and its outcome. Voting took place last Friday and over the course of the weekend, seats in Dáil Éireann began being filled. There were some high-profile losses and some interesting gains. Aisling, will you run through those of interest to our listeners?
Yes, so all 174 seats were finally filled after Cavan Monaghan provided the final results for us late on Monday night. Some very long days and nights across the country in count centres. And I suppose the scores on the doors after the election was Fianna Fáil emerged as the biggest party with 48 seats, followed by Sinn Féin with 39 and Fine Gael with 38. Labour and the Social Democrats both won 11 seats. Independent Ireland have 4. People Before Profit Solidarity secured 3. Ain 2 will hold 2 seats in the new Dáil, and independents and others accounted for 17 seats. And the Green Party managed to retain just 1 of its 12 seats. So a very, very bad day at the office for the Green Party in general election 2024. I suppose looking at it from an agricultural standpoint, Stella, maybe the most high profile people in politics would of course be the Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and that is Charlie McConalogue, who had quite the battle to hold on to his seat in Donegal. His party colleague in Fianna Fáil, Pat the Cope Gallagher, performed much better than Charlie McConalogue in terms of initial first preferences. And for a time, it looked like Charlie McConalogue's seat could have been in doubt, but he did secure the transfers necessary. And he was elected without surpassing the quota, it has to be said, but he did manage to secure the last seat in the Donegal constituency, so is returning to Dáil Éireann. Now, I suppose also of note in the Department of Agriculture, of course, would be Minister of State Martin Hayden. He secured his Dáil seat in his constituency of Kildare South with a very strong performance there as well. He was elected on the 11th count in that constituency, and he was the second candidate elected in the constituency, as Ceann Comhairle Sean O'Farrell would have been returned automatically. That's the rules, the way it works in the electoral rules, so to speak. And I suppose the other one then, of course, that would only leave Pippa Hackett, who is the other Minister of State, the Super Junior Minister, the Senator, the Green Party Senator, who was unsuccessful in her bid to win a seat in the Offaly constituency. Now, she had acknowledged to Agriland, Stella, in advance of the election that it was going to be an uphill battle for her. But I think even across the Green Party, I'd say they're surprised at how much of an uphill battle it was for the entire party. Really, the minority party in the outgoing government, it really did get a kicking from the electorate, that has to be said. But Roderick O'Gorman, the leader of the Green Party, will be returning to Dáil Éireann. Now, Sinn Féin's agriculture spokesperson Martin Kenny secured his re-election as well in the Sligo-Leitrim constituency, surpassing the quota there. And there was also a number of other prominent rural TDs who retained their seats across the country as well. They include Independent Ireland's Michael Fitzmaurice and Independents Carol Nolan and Matty McGrath, along with the Healy-Rae brothers in my own county here in Kerry. Michael Fitzmaurice comfortably re-elected to the Dáil after the first count in his constituency of Roscommon, Galway, surpassing the quota in that constituency by almost 2,000 first preference votes. So, a good day at the office for some, not for others, particularly the Green Party, Stella. And of course, now all of the horse trading begins and the makeup of a new government, and it's yet to be seen what way that will look. But all indications are that it'll be Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil and 1 or 2 others, or maybe a selection of independents. We'll have to see how the negotiations go and the horse trading goes over the coming weeks ahead.
Well, this is it. It will be interesting to see who goes into government with them. And I think they're to meet on the 18th of this month, and whether or not they will go for a grouping of independents or maybe go in with Labour again, and whether or not, you know, Fianna Fáil will get the agriculture portfolio again. I suppose Fianna Fáil has the most seats, so it probably has the strongest negotiating position, Aisling. And I suppose Fianna Fáil would have always considered themselves a very agricultural party, particularly if you listened to the promises being made in the run-up to the election. So it will, I suppose, be interesting to see who gets that portfolio. Will it remain with Fianna Fáil as it was with Charlie McConlogue? Would he be a contestant to go back in again? Although, he wasn't massively favoured in his constituency to top the bowl or anything like that. Would they get someone new? Maybe the likes of Derek Leary. Not particularly someone new in the sense that he was Agriculture Minister before, but that was only for a 3-week period. And then, of course, you have the likes of Martin Hayden, who did quite well in Kildare. He's already familiar with Agriculture House. So it may be interesting to see. It will obviously be a certainty that this time around the Environment Minister will not be a member of the Green Party. And that in itself, Aisling, obviously has long-term impacts for the agricultural sector.
Yeah, it really does, Stella. I think the electorate were very much resounding in their rejection of the Green Party at this election. And I think it's interesting what you say about Martin Hayden, because Fine Gael did have a bit of a clear out in terms of sitting TDs and a lot of new faces for Fine Gael. So, Hayden would be seen as quite a senior figure now in the new Dáil. So would he be looking at maybe a portfolio somewhere else in a different ministry perhaps? But I'm sure he would probably be looking to get a ministry if it all pans out that way as well. But there is a lot of speculation about who will be going to Ag House and what the new 3 ministers will look like, and I suppose how it'll be carved up. I think it will be very interesting depending on who goes into government with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, if that's the way it all works out in the end. Who might, if it, for instance, if it was the Independents or Independent Ireland went in, would the likes of maybe Michael Fitzmaurice be viewing, a run at being Minister for Agriculture as well. So a lot to play for, and it's very interesting times for sure.
Absolutely. Moving on now to another story that was quite prominent this week, the annual general meeting of the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, that's the ICMSA. It took place over the past week, and much of the statements emerging from it touched on many various different topics, from derogation upwards. And Aisling, you attended that AGM yourself, so tell us what was discussed.
Yes, Stella. So as you said, a lot of different topics were discussed at the AGM. But one that really came to the fore was the whole issue of bovine TB and how we are tackling it or not tackling it, as many farmers might feel, across the country. We are seeing an increase in reactor rates and the number of herds that are being locked up because of this disease. And there was a huge amount of interest in the room in Limerick at the Radisson Blu for Brendan Gleeson's comments. And Brendan is the General Secretary at the Department of Agriculture. So very, very high up in terms of the civil service in the department. And people wanted to know what he had to say about what the department were going to do about this issue. And he told the room that there has to be a reset in the policy around bovine TB. Now, that's something he's said previously, Stella, before the Oireachtas Agriculture Committee as well. And he said that there aren't too many things that keep him awake at night, but TB does. And he said it was obvious that we have to do something beyond what we're doing now. And he said that we have to have an honest conversation about what is needed out there to halt the march of this disease. And he said we need to be doing everything we can to stop herd-to-herd transmission, to limit transmission within herds from high-risk animals, and to also mitigate the risk from wildlife as well. And he pointed to the whole issue of vaccination against TB. And he said that the department itself is no ideological opposition to the whole vaccination. But he said that that technology and that research, it's still ongoing at the moment. And that there is a problem there where it's hard to differentiate between a vaccinated animal and a TB positive animal. So he said that once that research is perfected, it is something that we could bring into the toolbox against TB, but we're not quite there yet. But he said something that we are doing at the moment, which is quite useful, is the National Genotyping Programme. He said it provides a real opportunity to identify TB resistant animals out there through genotyping. So he said that that was a very exciting technology. And look, obviously, when the floor was open for questions, Stella, we heard an awful lot of testimony from farmers, including one farmer who lost 10% of his animals to TB. He said in the 20 years on his family farm, they'd never had the disease inside the farm gate. And last September, 22 animals went down with TB. So, he said it was devastating for his family. And, Brendan Gleeson did agree that, that was a shocking blow to any farmer. And another farmer called for a structured deer cull and for more vaccinations for badgers. Another one had said that he'd lost confidence in the science around the TB eradication programme, but he did acknowledge that the department are currently looking into those anomalies at the moment as well. And we also heard from former ICMSA President Pat McCormick. He highlighted the whole issue of cattle movements around the country. And he actually pointed back, I suppose, to when we had the issue of brucellosis in this country, and I suppose the strong measures that we took around movements of animals when it came to eradicating that disease. And Brendan Gleeson did say that, you know, farm to farm movements of cattle pose a risk when it comes to TB, along with movements to and from marts as well. And he said if we're going to honestly have a conversation about how we mitigate the risk of spreading TB, we have to have a conversation about those elements as well. And he said he wouldn't accept that all of the solutions lie with the department on this issue. He said the whole sector has to work together, and some difficult decisions are going to have to be made about movements, about mitigating the risk for farmers, about getting the information out to people about what they need to do to manage their own risk as well. And he said that we have to look beyond wildlife. He said he gets concerned when people just simply focus on wildlife all the time. It obviously has a role here, but he said the budget for wildlife control has doubled since 2019. And I know a lot of farm organisations, including the ICMSA, have been very critical of the department's wildlife control programme. But I think, you know, he said that we are vaccinating and culling more badgers than ever before. And he said a full-scale cull of badgers wouldn't be tolerated. They're a protected species. So that's not something that we can have in our toolbox as well. You know, so it was a very wide-ranging discussion, and it was something that Dennis Drennan picked up in his inaugural speech to the AGM as ICMSA president. And he had a wide-ranging speech, Stella, including saying that the association's core concern is family farm income. He also spoke about the EU Mercosur trade deal. We'll be coming back to that in a little while. The burden of regulation on farmers, live exports and nitrates, and the derogation as well. And he spoke about the issue of TB, and he said what we're doing isn't working. We need to follow the science, and that everybody has a role to play in this and getting on top of this. And here's some of what he had to say to Agriland at the AGM in Limerick.
That's a big cause for concern around the country, Dennis.
Absolutely. Like TB have gone to record levels in the past 2 or 3 years. It's completely gone out of control. Our members are really at our area and regional meetings for the past number of months. It's the number one issue out there almost. Real frustration there at what's happening on the ground. No real new science coming on board, no real new testing regime, no real answers, no real solutions to this. So we really need to get into science-based results and analyse where TB is coming from, how is it spreading, and then put a plan in place to eliminate TB if we can, or at least reduce the numbers.
So that is Dennis Drennan there, the ICMSA president, Stella, speaking to Agriland. And just before we leave it, one or two other good talking points from the AGM. Brendan Gleeson, the Secretary General at the department, said he was reasonably confident that Ireland will have a nitrates derogation after 2026, but he couldn't guarantee that there mightn't be some new conditions attached to that if we do get that extension from the Commission and from other member states as well. But he said we're going to have to show that we are improving water quality. Another big issue was Board Bia farm audits. Jim O'Toole, the chief executive of Board Bia, told the AGM that work is ongoing to try and streamline the process of farm audits. And he said that around 43,000 audits are conducted by Board Bia every year. And he said that it's really important for the people who are buying Irish produce that they want to see this, I suppose, guarantee of traceability, sustainability and everything that the Origin Green programme and the QA schemes provide as well. But farmers did speak in the meeting about the stress that audits cause, about the behaviour of some, and I stress some, auditors on the ground. And one farmer said he feels like he's the fear of God in him when there is an auditor coming out to his farm, such is the stress that it caused. And Jim O'Toole said that Board Bia monitors the performance of their auditors very closely. And he invited any of the farmers present who've had an issue with an auditor to come and speak to him afterwards directly as well. And he said that the overwhelming majority of auditors are actually farmers themselves as well. And finally, from the AGM as well, Stella, Conor Galvin gave a presentation. He's the chief executive of Ornua. And he said that the dairy sector will come into the start of next year with a good milk price. And he said he thinks that the average milk price for next year for the entire 12 months, provided that supply doesn't dwarf demand, the average price for next year should hold where we were this year, probably even a bit better, but he did say that is just an average. And responding to questions from farmers about Donald Trump, we can't go very far ever without talking about Donald Trump. Of course, the US president-elect is threatening to increase import tariffs, which of course would be a big concern for Ornua, because its Kerrygold butter brand is the number 2 butter brand in the United States and has a very, very loyal consumer base over there, including the Kardashians, we were told at the AGM, Stella.
I don't know what happened with the people who voted for the number 1. Very misguided.
Very misguided, because it is definitely the best butter. I think it is the number 1 imported butter over there. But so Conor Galvin said that they actually have moved product into the US just ahead of any possible increase. He said it's still very up in the air at the moment. Before, Trump's inauguration in January, there's probably a lot of kite flying and a lot of rhetoric going on. But look, nobody wants to see a trade war either. It's not going to be good for agriculture or any other sector if we've trade wars between big countries and big trading blocs around the world, including the EU. So, they have moved product in, but I mean, if there is an increase in those import tariffs, that won't do much for the product that will have to be moved in afterwards. So, there will be an implication there, not just, of course, for Ornua, but for all imports into the States.
And speaking about trade there, I mean, we're an island nation and we export 90% of the food that we produce. So trade really does impact on the viability of farming and food production in this country. So speaking about trade, another farm organisation over the past week is hoping to exert its political weight. And that's the Irish Farmers Association, the IFA, which had a major campaign against the acceptance of the Mercosur trade deal by the European Commission. So basically, the free trade deal would allow an additional 99,000 tonnes of beef from the Mercosur countries, they're the countries in South America, enter into the EU market tariff-free. Now, of course, the EU would be getting something out of this as well. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. So they'd be expecting exports going in the opposite direction too. But nonetheless, farmers are not happy, Aisling, are they?
Yeah, the IFA definitely coming out with a show of force this week, delivering a letter of protest to the EU Commission office in Dublin on Wednesday. And the IFA president, Francie Gorman, said that the Mercosur negotiations have ramped up. It's something we've been speaking about here on the podcast. And we have been talking about this possibility of the deal being split, where it might mean that member states don't get to vote on maybe the trade aspects, which is what farmers are incredibly concerned about. And as you said, that 99,000 tonnes of beef coming into the EU as well. And Francie Gorman said that the deal is the height of hypocrisy. He believes there'll be no level playing field for EU farmers in this. He said that our markets are going to be undermined by cheap imports produced to what he claimed is a lower standard. And he said if the deal is concluded by the Commission, it will need to be approved by the EU Council of Member States, where there is still significant opposition to any deal being concluded. And he did say, that there is, I suppose, advantage being taken maybe of the political strife and controversy that's happening in France at the moment. France domestically has an awful lot of issues going on politically, which we won't get into now. But France is a big opponent to the Mercosur trade deal. And I suppose if their eye is off the ball a little bit, I suppose the fear is that this will be pushed through as well. So I suppose they do believe that there is an absence, the IFA, of robust tracing systems for suppliers of beef, cattle from Brazil into the EU market. They really were questioning that. It's something that we would have heard from a French supermarket as well. We talked about that last week and there was a bit of a rollback on all of that as well. But definitely the IFA coming out very strongly, delivering that letter to the EU Commission office, leaving them in no doubt about their position on this. And it has to be said that the ICSA, the Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association, they are over in Brussels this week as well. And basically, I suppose, opposing this renewed momentum behind the Mercosur trade deal. And Sean McNamara, the president of the ICSA, again voicing huge concerns about the proposition of maybe this deal being split. And it's definitely something I think that the farm organisations are very keen to fight against, Stella. But is there a feeling that you're rushing against the tide here a little bit if Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission are all in favour of it, and if it is legal for them to split this deal, where do we end up then?
Exactly. And just briefly, Aisling, speaking about beef exports and imports. There was some good news on that front with the reopening of the South Korean market for Irish beef exports. Just remind our listeners briefly, Aisling, about the background there.
Yeah, so earlier this year we reported that shipments of beef products to China and South Korea from Ireland were temporarily suspended after an atypical case of BSE was discovered in a cow here. And I suppose it's important to note, according to the Department of Agriculture here, atypical BSE occurs sporadically in all cattle populations at a very low rate, and it's not considered a public health risk, unlike classical BSE, which arises from contaminated animal feed. So that is very important to say. So what we did learn this week, Agriland revealed that the suspension of Irish beef exports to South Korea was lifted, and there will be a return of Irish beef products to the market now. And Board BIA have said that they've welcomed this move, and they said they're ready to implement an extensive promotional campaign during 2025 to grow awareness and the reputation of Irish beef in South Korea. So very, very positive there with South Korea. We're still waiting to hear if there's any update from China at this point.
Now, the future viability of Irish farms is something we cover regularly on Agriland. And this week, the state of the sector was in the spotlight with the publication of the Teagasc Outlook report 2025. There is some positivity in the report, Aisling, in terms of a forecasted increase in the average farm income. So what is the detail?
Yeah, there was an awful lot in this report, Stella. We had a kind of final estimates of what the incomes, the average incomes across the sector for this year will be. You can check those out on our website and app. But I suppose looking ahead to the coming 12 months, it is very interesting because Teagasc are forecasting that the average farm income next year is forecast to increase by 22% on this year to stand at €35,700. Of course, that average figure collapsed last year under a very, very difficult 2023 trading conditions. It slipped under the €20,000 mark. So it is positive to see this trajectory now going upwards. We are learning that the increases will be driven primarily by the dairy and the tillage sectors. And I suppose looking at the individual sectors in this report for 2025, we see that on dairy farms, the average income for 2025 will stand at about €113,000, which will be up 27% on this year. For cattle rearing, the forecasted average income for the coming year is €10,800, up 14% on this year. For cattle other, it stands at €18,500 of an average income for 2025. That's up 9%. In sheep, it's €17,250 of an average income for 2025, up 15%. And in tillage, they see a 40% increase on this year's average income, up to €42,000 for 2025. Now, the report says that dairy commodity prices will enter next year at an elevated level, and the short-term outlook remains quite positive. Taking the year as a whole, they're saying there is scope for further improvement in Irish milk prices next year, given that the price for butter in particular is at an extremely high level. And they said that averaging over the year milk prices in 2025 could be up 5% on the levels that we saw this year. Now, of course, that's assuming an awful lot of factors, Stella, most notably the weather, which has played havoc earlier this year and at the back end of last year as well, when it came to grass, particularly maybe on dairy farms. But they are saying that if the weather conditions are more favourable next year, there is a scope for a yield-based increase in milk production of 4% and some savings from lower feed volumes. Hopefully that farmers would see their animals out at grass rather than feeding them the silage that they need for the winter. Now, cattle prices are forecast to increase marginally next year. The forecast is for a 4% increase in finished cattle prices and a 2% increase in weanling prices in 2025 relative to this year. Production costs for those farming systems are also expected to slightly ease. When it comes to tillage, we were being told that cereal prices are forecast to be marginally higher at harvest 25. Under the assumption that trend yields are achieved, yields in 25 would be up on this year's level, factoring in stable production costs for 2025. And we were told that the pig sector may be a little bit more challenged because the volume of pig production is forecasted to increase by a further 1%, and pig prices are forecast to decrease though by 8%. So the amount of money farmers spend as well on farm inputs across most sectors thankfully is set to decrease in next year, we're being told, I suppose building on the decreases that we saw this year, Stella. So that is a positive. And look, as I said, you can check out our website and our app for a lot more details on that report.
Let's continue with another story, I suppose now, Aisling, that also affects farm incomes, and that's payments. Scheme payments, to be exact, under the Common Agricultural Policy are a lifeline to many farm enterprises. And it was like Santa came early this week, Aisling, with all the announcements from outgoing Agriculture Minister Charlie McConalogue.
Yeah, I'd say farmers would argue they have to write a lot more than one letter to the department to get their payments in December. So as you said, quite a lot of scheme updates this week in December, in the first week of the month. And farmers, as you said, will be very happy to see that money arriving into their bank accounts. So let's start with Monday, when it was announced that €270 million would be issued to farmers in the form of a balancing payment for the 2024 Basic Income Support for Sustainability payment. Of course, that's BIS, and the Complementary Redistribution of Income Support for Sustainability, that is CRIS as well. And according to Charlie McConalogue, who of course is still the Minister for Agriculture until such time as a new government is formed, 98% of eligible applicants are now in receipt of a payment under that scheme. And the start of BIS and CRIS balancing payments will bring the total paid under the 2024 scheme to some €807 million, with almost 116,500 farmers now in receipt of a payment. And the Minister also confirmed that payments under the 2024 Complementary Income Support for Young Farmers was also starting this week. That is a payment to farmers under the age of 40 who are educated in agriculture to help them succeed in farming, and 31 million is being paid out under that scheme to just over 5,500 young farmers. Now, on Wednesday, we reported that the balancing payments under the Areas of Natural Constraints, the ANC scheme, had commenced. Payments totaling €241 million have issued to almost 97,000 farmers under the ANC payment, and that represents an increase on previous years. And payments for the scheme as well for year 2 of the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme, SCEP, have also commenced. They commenced today, Thursday. In total, over €47.8 million will be rolled out to just under 15,000 Suckler farmers participating in SCEP. The department did say it may take up to 5 days for those payments to reach your bank accounts, and they reminded any participants with outstanding documentation needed for either the department or for ICBF to get that into them as soon as possible to get that payment paid as well. Now, keeping with beef, and we saw payments worth just under €20 million being issued this week to over 23,000 farmers taking part in the beef welfare scheme as well. And the department said that the processing of payments is a key priority and that payments will be visible in the farmers' bank accounts in the coming days as well. And I suppose just before we leave schemes, Stella, interesting update from the organic side of the house. We learned this week that a total of 703 farmers have applied for the organic farming scheme, with Galway and Mayo accounting for the highest number of applications at 76 and 68 farmers respectively. Lowest number of applications coming from Dublin and Kilkenny. So interesting there. Another intake into the organic farming scheme, maybe slightly down on what we had a prediction maybe of around 1,000. So just over 700 in the latest tranche of the organic farming scheme.
Thanks for all of that, Aisling. Now, before we sign off from this week's episode, there is one very good news story that it would be remiss of me not to mention. Over the past week, the Guild of Agricultural Journalists held its biennial Agri Guild Awards 2024 in association with FBD Insurance. Essentially, the great and the good of the agri media industry submit samples of their work from the past 2 years in a number of categories. And then, of course, there's always an overall winner who received the bronze bull sculpture. I'm delighted that Agriland, who had 5 nominations for the awards, came away with 3 gongs on the night. Aisling, we were also thrilled with the result of the awards. Please remind our listeners of the entries and the winners.
Yeah, of course. So we were, I suppose, putting away the wellies last Friday night and taking out the dresses and the tuxes and the heels, Stella, and putting on the glad rags for the night at the Castle Knock Hotel for the Agri Guild Awards, which are sponsored by FBD. And as you said, Agriland went into the night with some 5 nominations across 4 of the 9 categories. So a great performance. And as you said, we took away 3 prizes on the night. First up, we took the top honours in the Best Visual Report category for the Agriland live stream of the National Ploughing Championships 2023. That was comprehensive coverage, which involved the entire Agriland team from editorial to commercial, and of course the video team, without which we wouldn't see any of the live stream. So it really was a huge team effort. So well done to the entire team on that. Our colleague, Breffney O'Brien, our technical beef specialist and friend of the podcast, took away the best feature story category for his very, very impactful story about a Cavan farmer who was lucky to survive falling into a slurry pit. And that actual story, Stella, which we've a link to on our website, if you haven't read that and seen that video, it is absolutely chilling. We spoke about it at the time here on the podcast, and seeing that man falling on that CCTV footage into the slurry tank, you just think he's a goner. And it is just such a timely reminder. And I think the judges did point to that about the importance of farm safety as well. And finally, and definitely not least, Agriland journalist Louise Hickey, another friend of the podcast, won the Best Use of Audio Award for her story about a Carlow farmer called Ned Deering. And Ned has spent about 10 years at least campaigning for people with learning difficulties. And Ned shared his story about his interaction maybe with the Department of Agriculture and how he's found it very, very difficult, I suppose, with his learning difficulties to navigate all the paperwork and the demands, modern demands of farmers out there. And Louise very, very, I suppose, innovatively included an audio transcript of an audio recording, I should say, of the story. So you could listen to it. So if you had a difficulty with reading, you could just listen to the story. And I think it really did resonate with the judges how clever a use of audio it was, because we were speaking about somebody who had a difficulty with reading and comprehension. So it was a fabulous use of audio, and huge congratulations to Louise. And of course to our other nominees, Charles O'Donnell, of course, our host here most weeks on the Farming Week podcast. He was nominated in the Best News Story category for a story about the Lancet report and all about plant-based diets, a very interesting report as well. And we also had a second nomination in the Best Visual Report category as well from Colm Ryan about Loch Funchna and the devastating flooding that has been impacting on farmers there. So a huge congratulations to everybody who entered, who was nominated and took home awards on the night. And I think the judging panel chaired by Tom Maguire and also Michael Berkery from the FBD Trust, they did pay tribute to everybody who entered the competition, and they did comment on the high standard of entries. So fair play to everybody across the agricultural media in this country and beyond. It was a great night for sure. And as I said, congratulations to everybody once again.
Absolutely. Congratulations to all the winners, Agriland and our colleagues in other media. We have the full list of winners actually up on the Agriland app and on the website if you want to take a look. Well, that's all we have time for on the Farming Week for this week. Thanks to Aisling O'Brien for joining me. And as always, thanks to our sponsor, AXA Insurance. Until next week, from myself, Stella Meehan, goodbye and take care.